Bellevue, Washington, May 2024. The kitchen in my parents' house was bright and cold white tile shining as if the floor were expecting guests. My father sat at the island with the newspaper folded into a precise square glasses, low on his nose, eyes moving without once lifting to meet mine. Robert leaned on the counter with his phone, thumbs tapping a rhythm. My mother stood beneath the oven clock and watched the digits advance, as if time itself were the guest of honor. In my hands, I carried a small box wrapped in brown paper, the corners clean, the ribbons simple. Inside waited a first edition of Devotions by Mary Oliver, the book she once read to me in the soft hour after dinner. I set the box on the counter and waited. The refrigerator hummed, a leaf blower started outside, then drifted away. My father folded a page. "We need to talk about Saturday," he said. "Mom's party," I answered. He nodded. "It will be a refined evening, a particular crowd." My mother smiled at the clock instead of me. Robert took a breath that sounded like a decision. "Mom's party will be very sophisticated," he said. "Maybe you should skip this one." The words landed soft and heavy like a pillow filled with stone. I looked at my mother. Her hands were clean and still. She did not step in. Robert kept going, gentle, in tone, sharp in meaning. "You rent, you code, you dress like a grad student. We cannot have that." My father cleared his throat. "People will ask questions we do not want to answer." I heard what they meant. "We are proud of the picture we have drawn, and you do not fit the frame." A cool ache rose and settled. I thought of nights that smelled like coffee, of servers whispering in the dark, of a team that trusted me with their hope. I thought of mornings when I watched the city wake from a blue screen and chose silence over asking to be seen. My mother lifted the gift, weighed it like a question, then set it down. Robert tilted his head. "It is not personal," he said. "It is optics." I remembered being 12 and leaving a science fair early so my mother would not be late for a luncheon remembered senior year, when a counselor called about a scholarship, and my father said I would be fine. Without it, remembered the Thanksgiving photo captioned "family together," and my empty chair cropped into the corner. I was not angry. I was inventory. "Is that what you want, Mom?" I asked. She blinked. "We just want what is best for the evening," she said. "People talk." The refrigerator clicked off. The room went even quieter. "Then I guess you will not have to answer any," I said. I slid the box closer to her and stepped back. Robert tapped his phone twice. I reached into my bag and took out white orchids in a paper sleeve, set them by the sink where the light fell across the petals. Dignity and grief live well together, I thought, and today they would have a place at this counter. I turned toward the doorway. "Meredith," my father said my name, careful and formal. I paused not to wait for him, but to give the room one last chance to be larger than appearances. Nothing came. I walked out with the calm of a tide. The front door was cool under my palm. On the porch, I stood for one breath, then another. I expected to feel small or broken. I felt something different. Space. They spoke to me like a public relations problem, not a daughter. The sentence wrote itself across the morning like a headline I could see. That morning I realized that silence can bruise louder than words, that choosing not to fight can be its own kind of clarity. I stepped off the porch and walked down the path through my mother's roses. The car door shut with a soft seal. I watched the house through the windshield, 3 figures in a room that had no room for me. I did not cry. I did not rehearse what I would say if they changed their minds. I did not try to picture a dress that would pass. I let the truth take its shape. In 3 days, a crowd would arrive to praise a life lived in the center of a certain circle. They would toast to good taste and marriages. They would not toast to code or risk, or a team that began with 2 people and a rented office. I turned the key. The engine woke. Have you ever been told you were not enough for your own family? The year I walked out of Microsoft felt like walking off a dock into deep water. Everyone clapped at the farewell lunch. There were cupcakes with blue frosting and a card signed by people who barely remembered my name. I packed 2 boxes, one marked Dev, one marked Personal, and carried them to my old Corolla. The rain hit the windshield in small, organized patterns, like applause fading. I told myself it was time to build something that belonged to me. Syntrix began in a subleased office above a cafe on Capitol Hill. 2 tables, 1 second-hand server, 1 intern named Theo, who believed more than I did. My mother came by once unannounced, holding a casserole as if ambition required feeding. She looked around her heels, loud on the hardwood. "Just don't tell anyone from church until it works out," she said. Her voice was soft. Practice the kind of tone that could pass for care. Robert called that evening. A laptop business. How cute. He laughed, the sound small and distant like something rehearsed. I smiled into the phone because silence always made him louder. A week later, I realized I had been removed from the family group chat. Thanksgiving. All was gone from my messages. No one mentioned it. It was as if digital erasure could be polite. On Thanksgiving morning, I scrolled through Facebook and saw them at the table, wine glasses raised, captioned, "Family Together." There were hearts, exclamation marks, and my empty chair reflected in the corner of a mirror. I took a screenshot and closed the app. That night, my father mailed a check for $500, the memo line blank. I kept it in an envelope taped behind a photo frame. It was not money, it was pity in paper form, and I wanted to remember its texture. Syntrix grew slowly, like something alive but unsure it should exist. We coded from 8 to midnight, drank burnt coffee, shared instant noodles when rent was due. There were nights I fell asleep at the desk and woke to the hum of the refrigerator downstairs thinking it was applause. When we signed our first client, a small logistics firm in Tacoma, I sent my mother a message. She replied the next day with a thumbs-up emoji. Months passed. The company learned to walk. We rented 2 more desks, then 3. My hair grayed faster, and I did not dye it. I liked what truth looked like. Robert called once to ask if I could help him with a data presentation. He needed a slide on trend prediction. I built it for him and silence sent it, and he presented it as his own. I watched the live stream, listened to the applause, and realized ghosts can work for free. They did not delete me. They muted me. The sentence wrote itself in my notebook somewhere between payroll calculations and code lines. 1 year later, in 2018, Syntrix was invited to speak at the Women in Tech Summit downtown. I was not sure I wanted to stand on a stage again, but my team insisted. Theo said, "People need to see who built this." The morning of the event, I wore the same black blazer from Microsoft. It fit differently. The sleeves remembered who I was. The auditorium smelled like dust and new carpet. I spoke for 20 minutes about clean data and quiet persistence. The applause was polite, but in it, I heard something real. Afterward, as I gathered my notes, I saw my mother across the room. She was talking to Margaret Hale, a CEO from another startup, All Pearls and Confidence. My mother walked over, kissed my cheek, then turned to Margaret and said, "This is my daughter. She's brilliant." Then she added, gesturing to Margaret, "You two should take a photo." Before I could answer, she handed her phone to an assistant. In the picture that appeared online that evening, Margaret smiled perfectly. My mother's hand rested lightly on her arm. The caption read, "Proud to meet such inspiring women in tech." I was tagged in the comments, not in the photo. I looked at it for a long time, then closed the app. Even ghosts crave warmth sometimes. I made tea and returned to work. The screen glowed blue, steady, and patient. The office smelled like solder and jasmine. I told Theo we would hire 2 more engineers next month. He grinned, said, "Maybe next year your family will brag about you." I smiled. Maybe I said, but not yet. Outside, the rain started again, soft against the glass. I thought of the check still taped behind the photo, the empty chair, the polite lies that kept people comfortable. I had stopped asking for warmth. What I wanted now was endurance. I wanted to see how far silence could go before someone mistook it for strength. Rainier Club Seattle winter of 2019. The chandeliers shimmered like they had secrets. Velvet drapes closed the night out of the windows, trapping candlelight and perfume in the air. The table stretched long and perfect, lined with silver that glowed under soft amber bulbs. My mother loved this room. She said it felt like tradition. I thought it felt like judgment polished to a shine. Robert sat across from me in a tailored navy suit, his cufflinks winking whenever he lifted his glass. To his left was his wife smiling without really looking at anyone. My father leaned slightly toward the end of the table, speaking to a banker who laughed on cue. I was between two of my mother's friends, one named Deborah, one named Elise, both scented with something floral and expensive. The waiter poured wine deep and red. I nodded politely. Deborah said she had heard I worked in computers. I smiled. Robert chuckled before I could answer. She's not a Ms. Cole, he said she's the coder one, the tech gypsy. The word rolled out easily rehearsed. My mother laughed lightly, that social laugh that says this is all harmless. Oh, Robert, stop, she said she's sensitive. Her bracelets clinked when she reached for the bread. I looked at her. She did not meet my eyes. I took a sip of wine. The glass trembled a little in my hand, but I held it steady. Gaslighting sounds polite when served with wine. My father glanced down the table. So are you still freelancing? He asked, as if he were remembering to play his part. No, Dad, I said quietly. Building. The silence that followed was full, the kind that fills every glass before the waiter can. Elise shifted in her chair. The pianist in the corner changed songs. Deborah smiled at me kindly the way people do when they want to erase discomfort without solving it. My mother turned to a guest and began discussing the floral arrangements. The moment passed, or rather, was buried alive. Later during dessert, a friend of my mother's leaned across the table and asked softly, "Is she the one who never married?" The way she said it, she could have been asking about a rare bird. My mother nodded once and smiled. The candles made their faces golden. I excused myself and went to the restroom. The mirror was framed in brass. In the reflection, I looked smaller than I remembered, framed by the shimmer of wealth that was never mine. They erased me with silverware smiles. I washed my hands slowly, the water hot enough to sting, then returned to the table. Coffee had been served. Robert was showing photos of his new home renovation. My mother clapped lightly after each picture. I sat, folded my napkin, and listened. My father asked about my apartment. Still in that little place on Capitol Hill, he said. I nodded. The rent is good, I said. He smiled like I had made a joke. The conversation flowed back to safe waters. I existed there as an empty chair filled by politeness. After dinner outside in the cool air, I waited by the valet stand. The city smelled of rain and exhaust. My mother joined me, pulling her coat tighter. She looked at the streetlights instead of me. You handled yourself well tonight, she said. I smiled faintly. Did I? I asked. She nodded. You're brilliant, Meredith, but you don't look successful. The sentence landed quietly, almost gentle. She meant it as advice. I felt it as a verdict. I opened my mouth to respond, but closed it again. There was nothing left to prove to her that would not make me smaller. A black car pulled up. She kissed my cheek, the air kiss that never touches skin, and got inside. I stood alone for a moment, watching the reflection of the chandeliers through the club window. Each one looked like a world spinning too fast for me to belong. I walked toward my car. Inside, the silence felt earned. I thought about the way success looks when defined by people who never built anything. My mother's words repeated in my mind, soft and cruel in equal measure. She's brilliant, but she doesn't look successful. I could already imagine the comments from her friends, the subtle pity disguised as concern. I started the engine. The dashboard light painted my hands gold. I thought of my team back at Syntrix, still coding, still believing. They were my reflection now. I drove through downtown, passing the dark glass towers that reflected themselves endlessly. In one of them, I saw my own car, small and moving like a quiet defiance sliding through the city's spine. By the time I reached my apartment, the rain had started again. I stood by the window and watched the lights smear across the glass. Somewhere, a violin played through an open window. I poured another glass of wine and raised it to the empty room. To the invisible, I said quietly, "We build in silence." Spring 2021. The city outside my window felt quieter than any winter I remembered. Even the sirens had learned to whisper. I worked from my Capitol Hill apartment, a small rectangle of space filled with screens and plants that leaned toward the light. The days blurred into each other, one long loop of code video calls and silence. Syntrix was losing clients. Logistics companies were shrinking. Budgets froze. But I refused to let go of anyone. Every 2 weeks, I opened the payroll file and sent out salaries on time, even when it meant moving money from my own account. My accountant called twice to warn me. I thanked him, then ignored the advice. I could live on canned soup. My team could not live on uncertainty. They mistook my focus for failure. That was the year I learned that conviction looks like stubbornness to the comfortable. On Sunday afternoons, we had family Zoom calls. My mother hosted. The background was always perfect, her books arranged by color, her lighting soft. My father sat beside her, glasses low, his voice mild. Robert logged in late and left early. I joined each time, hoping habit might pass for connection. That March, I joined as usual, hair tied back, mug of coffee in hand. The conversation was small talk about vaccines and grocery deliveries. When I mentioned how Syntrix had pivoted to analytics for supply chain resilience, my mother smiled and said, "We just need to prioritize, how you ramble about work." She said it gently, but the sentence closed like a door. I smiled too, nodded, and clicked mute. It's amazing how family can mute you with a smile. I left the microphone off for the rest of the call. I watched their faces in the small rectangles, laughing about recipes and old vacations. I was still there, but no longer part of the sound. The next morning, I opened my inbox to find 47 messages from clients, half cancellations. I answered each one, thanking them, offering discounts, refusing to break the calm tone that kept us credible. That afternoon, Theo called. He said we had to choose between paying vendors or payroll. I chose payroll. He did not argue. 2 days later, I got an email from my father. Subject line, small opportunity. He said Robert had found a promising startup in data aggregation, asked if I could review their deck. I opened the file. It was a near copy of Syntrix's model, only dressed in corporate polish. I scrolled to the bottom. Investment round closed with $25,000 from my father. I stared at the screen for a long minute, my pulse steady as if disbelief needed silence to breathe. I wrote one line back, "Looks promising." Then I deleted the draft. That evening, I watched the newsmask mandates, lifting markets, reopening the world, pretending recovery was balance. I felt something shift, not anger, not grief, something colder, cleaner, the point where patience hardens into decision. A week later, Robert called. His tone was falsely warm. He asked how my little company was doing. He said little, as if it were a mercy. I told him we were holding steady. He laughed. "Well, not everyone can scale," he said. He mentioned his friends in venture circles, the importance of optics again. I kept my voice even. "Optics are for people without results," I said. He paused, said something about me always being too emotional about work, then hung up. 2 days later at midnight, I was cleaning my inbox when I saw it. An email forwarded accidentally from Robert's address to mine. The subject read, "Syntrix Overview for Potential Investors." It was a copy of a confidential memo I had written months ago, below a comment chain between him and a colleague. His message said, "She's too emotionally driven for scale." I read it 3 times. The timestamp said 11:04 p.m. The version I sent had been watermarked, meaning he had used his legal access to share it. I did not reply. I simply moved it to a folder titled Proof. Then I closed my laptop and sat by the window. The city was dark and wet neon lights bending through the rain. I remembered every dinner, every glance, every sentence that framed my work as hobby, my focus as obsession. "They will never ask," I whispered, "and I will never explain." The next morning, I wired another round of payroll. Theo sent a message saying, "You're saving everyone again." I told him, "No, we're saving each other." The news that week said optimism was returning to the market. I looked at my account balance, now more red than black, and felt strangely at peace. There is a kind of quiet that arrives only when the illusion of family dies. It is not loneliness, it is clarity. I stood by the window until the sun rose behind the cranes and glass towers, the rain turning to mist. The world kept moving. The ghosts of disappointment finally stopped knocking. I sat down, opened a new document, and began sketching the model that would make Syntrix impossible to copy. I built the algorithm line by line, patient, ruthless, calm. Outside, the city began to wake. Inside, I no longer waited to be seen. By 2023, Syntrix had become something real, something with weight. 120 employees across 3 cities, Seattle, Austin, and Denver. The kind of growth that once seemed imaginary now fit neatly inside payroll spreadsheets and office leases. Our Seattle headquarters was a converted warehouse, concrete and glass softened by the hum of servers and the quiet rhythm of work. I arrived early each morning before the chatter began, coffee in hand, watching the sunrise touch the bay through the high windows. We had built something that functioned like a living mind, clean, adaptive, invisible to those who had never believed. I never posted updates on LinkedIn. No panels, no interviews, no announcements. The world thought I was small because I didn't announce. I wanted it that way. Noise attracts ego, and ego attracts failure. Power doesn't need noise. It needs precision. Anna Lee, my co-founder, understood that. She was all motion and calm, at once the kind of person who could convince investors without raising her voice. One afternoon, she leaned against my office door, arms crossed, and said, "You're building a fortress of silence, Meredith." She meant it as a compliment. I nodded. "Walls can keep things safe," I said. She smiled, but her eyes held questions. Safe from what she asked. I didn't answer. The offices ran on discipline. Teams in 3 time zones moved like clockwork. We held short stand-ups, precise and respectful. Syntrix didn't celebrate wins loudly. Success was measured in what stayed stable when everything else shook. We had built an analytics engine capable of predicting mid-market logistics demand. Across regions, a quiet revolution in the supply chain chaos that had followed the pandemic. Tech Venture Global noticed. They had been circling for months, sending polite emails requesting meetings through intermediaries. When we finally met, it was over coffee at their Seattle office. Their CEO, Margaret Reeves, was older than I expected, sharp in a way that made you want to listen twice before speaking. She said, "We've watched you scale without noise." "That's rare," I smiled. "Silence travels faster," I said. We met 4 more times. Lawyers spoke in the language of due diligence and valuation models. Each meeting ended with longer handshakes. Anna managed the details. I watched the structure of the deal form like architecture. At night, I stayed in the office long after everyone left. The screens cast blue light across the glass walls, the hum of the servers, steady as breath. Sometimes I would stand by the window and see the reflection of myself layered over the city skyline. The woman in the glass looked calm, almost distant. I thought about how no one in my family had asked about Syntrix in years. My father sent the occasional holiday email, my mother forwarded church newsletters, Robert posted photos of vacations. They existed in a world where my name never needed mentioning. It suited them. I had become the story they told by omission. It amused me that they still didn't realize their image of success had quietly started to orbit mine. When Tech Venture Global offered to begin formal negotiations, I agreed to a call on May 3rd. The first discussion went well, the kind that starts slow and ends with unspoken certainty. We set the final signing for May 17th. My birthday is not memorable to them, but May 18th is my mother's. The symmetry made me pause. Poetic irony has its own sense of timing. On May 1st, I flew to Austin to visit our satellite office. It was warm, bright, the air thick with dust and optimism. I walked through the rows of desks, engineers focused music low in their headphones. They greeted me with quiet respect, the kind that comes from trust, not fear. In the corner hung a whiteboard covered in equations and sketches. Someone had drawn a small crown above the company logo. I asked who did it. They laughed and said it appeared one morning and no one wanted to erase it. I let it stay. That evening, Anna and I sat outside a small bar, the kind with string lights and soft music. She raised a glass. To 7 years of building something no one saw coming, she said. I lifted mine. To the things that stay unseen until they matter. Back in Seattle, preparations for the deal moved fast. Legal teams exchanged drafts. The valuation was more than I had ever imagined. $300 million. I looked at the number and felt only quiet relief. It wasn't greed. It was validation wrapped in arithmetic. On May 16th, I received a message from my mother reminding me about her party. She wrote, "Hope you'll make it this year. We're hosting something tasteful." The word tasteful made me smile. I replied, "I'll try to stop by," and left it at that. That night, as the city went to sleep, I stood by the office window again. Below the streets glowed in pale gold. The company I built was preparing for a future larger than my own, yet I felt no urge to announce it. The world would know soon enough. Quiet empires do not roar when they rise. They hum, and the sound is mistaken for distance until it fills the air. I thought of my mother's party. The laughter, the polished glassware, the people who would ask questions they once feared. They would speak my name differently after May 17th. I whispered the date aloud. 17 for closure, 18 for irony. The numbers felt right. I turned off the lights, leaving only the servers glowing blue, a cathedral of code, singing in the dark. May 14, 2024. The house looked smaller that morning, or maybe I had simply outgrown its silence. I stood in the same kitchen I had left years before, the same scent of lemon polish and distant judgment hanging in the air. My father read his newspaper with surgical precision, folding each page before turning it. My mother rearranged lilies on the counter, pretending not to hear what was being said. Robert leaned back against the marble island, immaculate as always, his tie a shade too proud for breakfast. He looked at me, the way a broker looks at an asset past its prime. You drive a Prius, you wear the same coat, he said. It was not cruelty in his voice. It was boredom. He had said versions of this before, and I had learned that he believed cruelty only counted if it was loud. My mother sighed softly, as though manners could soften exclusion. Robert smiled at her and added, "We just need to think about the guests. The optics." I nodded once. "Enjoy your optics," I said quietly. My father lifted his eyes for a moment, almost startled by the calm in my voice, but said nothing. They measured me by invitations. I measured them by silence. On the counter, my gift sat unopened, the brown wrapping untouched. I could see the faint corner of the Mary Oliver book peeking from the paper, as if it remembered the last time it was ignored. Robert's phone buzzed, and he excused himself with the confidence of someone certain he would never need to explain himself to anyone. My mother turned to me, her tone softer now, almost pleading. "Meredith, please understand it is just a matter of how it looks." I smiled without warmth. "That's all it ever was," I said. "How it looks." She flinched slightly, then straightened, smoothing her blouse as if the gesture could restore the hierarchy. Every hierarchy collapses when truth enters the room. I looked at her one last time and saw not malice, but fear, the kind that hides behind polished manners and expensive light fixtures. I wanted to tell her that she didn't need to protect her reputation from me anymore, that her reflection would soon be illuminated by something far brighter than any chandelier she owned. But I said nothing. Silence was sharper than explanation. As I walked toward the door, I caught Robert's voice in the hallway, low and self-satisfied, discussing a client merger. He didn't know the company he represented as legal counsel was a client of Syntrix. He didn't know that his paycheck partly depended on the system he once mocked. "You're already on my payroll," I thought, and almost smiled. Outside, the morning was cold and clear, the kind of air that strips away pretense. I opened my car door and glanced back once through the front window. My mother was rearranging the flowers again, as if changing their position could change the story. I started the engine and drove away the house, shrinking in the mirror until it became nothing but a frame without a picture. At a red light, I checked my phone. A message from Anna waited. Margaret confirmed final signatures for tonight 6 p.m. Congratulations, boss. I stared at the words, letting them sink in without the excitement they might have once brought. Relief, perhaps. Vindication, yes. But mostly the quiet satisfaction of completion. They had disinvited me, and I had already built the world that would not need their approval. At the office, the day unfolded like precision clockwork. Teams were finalizing last-minute reports. The air was different, anticipation woven with exhaustion. Anna entered my office holding a folder. "We are ready," she said. "Are you?" I nodded. "Let's finish it." At 5:58, I stood at the conference table across from Margaret Reeves. The room overlooked downtown Seattle, the sky washed in late spring gold. Margaret smiled, pen poised. She said, "Your platform will redefine mid-market analytics." I replied, "It was built to listen where others speak." She nodded, signed, then handed me the pen. I wrote my name slowly, each letter deliberate. The ink dried in silence. The deal closed at precisely 6 o'clock. The wire would hit before sunset. $300 million. The number did not thrill me. It steadied me. It reminded me that patience could build monuments. Anna exhaled her grin, breaking through the tension. "You did it," she said. I looked out the window at the horizon where clouds drifted like quiet witnesses. My mother's party would start in less than an hour. Guests would arrive with smiles and polite curiosity. They would drink champagne and talk about family, never suspecting that the story they had polished for years was dissolving quietly in real time. Power doesn't announce itself. It arrives in silence. At 7 o'clock, I left the office. The city lights reflected on the windshield as I drove home. My phone buzzed again. News alerts, congratulations, headlines forming. I didn't open them. I parked near the waterfront and stepped out into the cool evening air. The sky was deep blue, the kind that comes just before darkness takes over completely. I stood there, breathing in the moment. Somewhere across town, my mother would be raising a glass, Robert talking too loudly, the same chandeliers glowing above them. They would not know yet. They would learn soon. Every empire begins in silence. Tonight mine had already spoken. The morning of May 17th began like any other Friday, quiet and gray above downtown Seattle. The city was half awake, its streets humming with the low rhythm of ambition. I arrived at Tech Ventures headquarters just after 9, coffee still steaming in my hand, the kind of coffee you drink not for taste but for ceremony. The receptionist greeted me with the polished warmth reserved for people about to sign something irreversible. Upstairs, the 23rd floor glowed with glass and precision. Margaret Reeves, the CEO of Tech Venture Global, stood by the window overlooking Elliott Bay. She was a woman who spoke rarely, but never without impact. Her tone carried the weight of boardrooms and beginnings. "Meredith," she said, extending a hand today, "we make it official." The contract lay open on the table, a mosaic of signatures and initials that represented 8 months of negotiation, 30 lawyers, and countless nights of revisions. I took my seat opposite her. The hum of the air conditioner felt louder than conversation. She smiled slightly, the kind that belonged to someone who had built empires quietly. "Your platform will reshape mid-market analytics," she said, sliding the final page toward me. I replied, "That was always the plan." She nodded, pleased by the understatement. For a brief moment, we both watched the digital clock on the wall. The deal would close at precisely 5:42 p.m., a timing chosen not for superstition but symmetry. Years of work compressed into the click of a wire transfer. Margaret reached for the pen. First, her handwriting neat and confident. When she finished, she placed the pen gently beside the folder. "Your turn," she said. I leaned forward, felt the cool weight of the pen between my fingers, and signed my name in a slow, deliberate motion, each letter carving itself into permanence. When the last stroke ended, Margaret said quietly, "Congratulations, Meredith. The sale is complete." I looked at the document, the ink still wet, the zeros impossibly long, and felt nothing explosive. No rush of triumph, no tears, just calm, clean stillness. The wire hit at 5:42 p.m., $300 million. At 5:45, my mother's party began. The timing could not have been scripted better. Somewhere across town, guests were arriving at the Bellevue Country Club, stepping through glass doors, complimenting floral arrangements, clinking champagne glasses. My mother would be adjusting her pearls. Robert would be shaking hands, smiling like he owned the air around him. The thought didn't sting anymore. It simply existed, a faint echo in a room I no longer occupied. Margaret broke the silence. "Are you sure you don't want a press quote?" she asked. Most founders seize this moment for exposure. I smiled no. Let silence do the introductions. She studied me for a beat, then laughed softly. "You're an unusual one, Meredith." "I take that as a compliment," I said. At 6 o'clock, the press release went live. The media team hit send from their polished office one floor below us. Within seconds, it spread across the web. Local entrepreneur sells data analytics firm for $300 million. Headlines appeared on tech news sites, business journals, local television feeds. Margaret's assistant stepped into the room holding a tablet, her expression a mix of awe and disbelief. "It's already trending," she said. "Channel 7 wants a statement. The Seattle Herald, too." Margaret waved her off. "Give her space. She's earned silence tonight." I appreciated that. We stood by the window as the city lights flickered on. Boats dotted the water like small moving stars. The air smelled faintly of rain even inside the glass tower, the kind of evening that felt aware of itself as though the world had been waiting for this exact alignment. Anna texted me from the office a photo of our team cheering with champagne confetti scattered across desks. The message read, "You did it, boss. Couldn't have done it with anyone else." I typed back, "We built something that will outlast noise." Across the street, an LED billboard glowed with breaking news graphics. My own face appeared there, the same photo from our company website, crisp and professional. I wondered if my parents were watching the same feed at their party. Perhaps someone would recognize me first, a guest whispering, "Isn't that your daughter?" The image shifted to the Syntrix logo, the blue and silver letters forming the word Cole, in subtle design, a decision I had made quietly 3 years earlier. Legacy had a way of writing itself even when uninvited. Margaret clinked her glass lightly against mine. "To precision," she said. "To patience," I replied. The room dimmed as the sun finally fell behind the Olympic Mountains. The reflection of the skyline shimmered against the window, layering the city over our faces. Somewhere, music was beginning at the country club, laughter rising over string instruments and small talk. Somewhere, my name was being rediscovered, reshaped, repeated with surprise. But here, in the tower of glass and light, there was only calm. I stayed until the cleaning staff began their rounds, their quiet movements echoing down the hall. When I finally stepped outside, the air had cooled. The first raindrops touched my coat. Seattle always knew how to close a chapter. I walked toward the parking garage, the sound of the city soft behind me. As I reached my car, my phone vibrated with dozens of alerts, reporters, messages, congratulations from strangers. I turned it off. I wanted to remember this moment unfiltered. No applause, no validation, just the knowledge that the story had turned itself inside out. The same people who had measured my worth in invitations would now measure silence differently. By the time I drove out onto the highway, the sky had turned black, and the radio was filled with the sound of my own name spoken by unfamiliar voices. The future, I realized, would introduce itself. All I had to do was let it. The Bellevue Country Club gleamed that evening like a polished secret. Every chandelier reflected perfection, every conversation rehearsed civility. The guests moved with the confidence of people certain they belonged. My mother's 60th birthday had begun at precisely 5:45, just as the wire hit my account. The valet line stretched across the driveway, black cars and small talk spilling onto the marble entrance. Inside, violins played near the fountain while waiters in white gloves balanced trays of champagne. My mother, Carol, wore navy silk and an expression of curated grace. She had planned this evening for months, every flower, every seat, every guest chosen with the precision of a campaign manager. Robert stood near the bar, charming his father's colleagues, laughing a little too loudly. He was the host, now the golden son, the family's visible pride. The lights dimmed for a toast. My father raised his glass, steady and formal. To Carol, he said, "The woman who keeps our world together." Applause followed, shallow and bright. Then someone turned toward the mounted television in the lounge corner, where the Channel 7 logo flickered silently. The volume had been muted earlier for ambiance, but as if on cue, the screen came alive. Breaking news filled the room. The headline read, "Local tech founder sells company for $300 million. Meet Meredith Cole." For a moment, no one spoke. The camera panned to my photo professional and calmed the same image now glowing against the champagne light. The anchor's voice carried clearly. The acquisition of Syntrix, a Seattle-based data analytics firm, marks one of the state's largest private tech sales. Its founder and CEO, Meredith Cole, is praised as a visionary leader in predictive analytics. A glass fell from someone's hand, shattering against the marble. Music faltered. Every head turned toward the screen. Mrs. Whitmore, my mother's oldest friend, leaned forward, frowning. "Carol, isn't that your daughter?" she asked. My mother's face drained of color. Robert froze, his jaw tightening. My father's glass hung midair. For years, they had rehearsed how to minimize me. Now they couldn't find a script fast enough. The anchor continued reporting from outside the Tech Venture Global building, a photo of Margaret Reeves shaking my hand now filling the screen. The words 300 million repeated again and again, echoing like a hymn. My mother whispered, "Turn it off," but no one moved. The volume grew louder, drowning the violins, overpowering the polite laughter that tried to survive. They threw me out of the room. The world let me back in. Robert stepped forward, muttering, "We didn't know we couldn't have known," as if ignorance was an excuse for absence. Mrs. Whitmore's gaze was sharp. "You didn't know your own daughter built a company. How strange." Around the room, guests whispered, eyes wide, phones raised discreetly. Someone recorded the moment, their curiosity feeding the silence. The broadcast cut to a close-up of the Syntrix logo, the metallic blue letters gleaming under studio light. The O in Syntrix formed a stylized shape, COLE, my name hidden in the design. A small private rebellion turned into national symbolism. Some spotlights burn, others illuminate. My mother's hand trembled as she reached for the table to steady herself. The orchid arrangement at the center wobbled, petals shaking. My father set his drink down and muttered, "Good God!" The music had stopped completely. In the reflection of the bar mirror, my mother saw her own image next to mine on the television, her face lined with the sudden awareness of reversal. I wasn't there, but I could imagine the silence, the humiliation disguised as shock. Across the city, I sat in my apartment in Capitol Hill, the television playing the same segment. I held a cup of tea, steam curling into the air. The world was loud outside, yet the room around me felt like a cathedral. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I simply watched. My phone buzzed endlessly on the counter messages from colleagues, acquaintances, reporters. I ignored them. The city lights reflected in the glass of my window, faint and distant. I took another sip of tea. On screen, the anchor began reading statements from Tech Venture Global. Margaret Reeves called Syntrix one of the most sophisticated and transformative platforms in recent memory. They showed a clip of our signing, her hand shaking mine. The angle captured my composure, my stillness. There was no need for commentary. The facts were enough. Back at the party, Mrs. Whitmore broke the silence with an almost gleeful tone. "Carol," she said, "my daughter joined a firm last year, but I suppose Meredith outdid us all." My mother nodded mechanically, her voice thin. "I'm so proud she lied." Eyes wet. Robert's phone buzzed. He stepped aside, reading messages that arrived faster than he could answer. The first from his law partner read, "Is this the same Syntrix we handle compliance for?" The realization hit him like ice. The company he represented had been mine all along. "You're already on my payroll," I thought quietly. At that exact moment, the news broadcast shifted to footage of Syntrix headquarters, the glass building gleaming under twilight. The reporter said, "It's rare for a founder to maintain full ownership until acquisition. Ms. Cole's discretion and precision have made her a symbol of integrity in the tech community." Guests murmured in awe. My father sat down slowly, his face unreadable. My mother blinked rapidly, tears spilling over. She looked at the television where my portrait faded into the Syntrix logo once again. Her voice cracked. "She always loved orchids," she said softly. The camera zoomed in on a bouquet of white orchids displayed in the tech venture lobby. The same species sat on her party table, a gift I had once left behind, unopened. The symmetry was unmissable. On one side of the city, applause filled a newsroom. On the other, a party dissolved into silence. I set down my cup of tea, switched off the TV, and let the quiet reclaim the room. They had measured worth by proximity, by appearance, by who sat at what table. Tonight the tables were empty of truth. Karma did not knock. It broadcast. I walked to the balcony, the cool air brushing against my face. The world below buzzed with noise and light, but I felt only peace. Would you have walked in that night or stayed home and let karma speak? The interview took place less than 24 hours after the deal closed. Channel 7 had called through every possible contact, and Lydia Grant herself insisted on hosting the segment. She was one of those anchors whose calm presence carried both gravity and empathy, the kind who could ask a difficult question without sounding like she was hunting for scandal. The studio was cool, the air heavy with the faint scent of stage lights and professionalism. I sat beneath the halo of cameras my reflection caught in the teleprompter glass. Lydia adjusted her notes, looked up, and smiled. "Congratulations, Meredith. The state is calling you the quiet face of innovation. How does it feel?" I took a breath, choosing words carefully. "It feels like closure," I said. "Not just for me, but for anyone who has ever been spoken over." She nodded, eyes sharp with understanding. "You built Syntrix in silence, no press, no noise. That's rare in tech, especially for women. Was that intentional?" "Yes," I said simply. "When people underestimate you, they hand you invisibility. You can waste time fighting it, or you can use it. Silence is the best camouflage for building something that lasts." Lydia leaned forward slightly, her voice lowering just enough to signal she was about to ask the question that mattered. What would you tell women who feel underestimated by their families, the ones who are dismissed, overlooked, maybe even excluded? I looked straight at the lens. "Don't shout for recognition," I said. "Build something that makes silence awkward." The room went still for a beat, even the camera operators pausing slightly, as if the air had shifted. Lydia blinked once realizing it was the kind of line that would outlive the interview. She repeated it softly. "Build something that makes silence awkward." "Yes," I replied. Vindication isn't loud, it's televised. The segment aired live at 7:30 p.m. while my mother's party was still disintegrating under the weight of whispered congratulations and thinly disguised pity. Someone at the country club turned the channel from music to news, perhaps curious, perhaps unable to resist the irony. The screen filled with my face again, but this time I was speaking. Lydia's question echoed across the dining hall. What would you tell women underestimated by their families? My answer followed calm and unflinching. The reaction was immediate. Guests turned toward the TV, the same people who had seen my photo hours earlier, now watching my composure in motion. A few younger guests pulled out their phones, filming the screen. The caption wrote itself. "She's their daughter, the one they excluded." Within an hour, the clip began circulating online, fragments of my words, overlaid with soft music text reading, "For every woman who stayed quiet until her work spoke louder." On TikTok, it gained thousands of views, then millions. One version paired my line with footage from the country club itself, guests frozen in discomfort while my voice played. The contrast was cinematic, almost cruel in its symmetry. At home, I watched the numbers climb, not with pride, but with a quiet astonishment at how truth travels faster when you stop chasing it. Lydia called me afterward saying the station's inbox had flooded with messages from women across the country. Small business owners, teachers, nurses, mothers. They wrote about dinners where they were talked over holidays, where their choices were belittled, dreams that were tolerated but never believed. They said your line gave them something to hold on to. I thanked her, though. What I really wanted to say was that I had written it for myself long before the camera caught it. I wasn't proving them wrong. I was proving myself right. Later that night, I walked along the waterfront. The sky was the color of slate, the air cool against my face. A man passing by recognized me from the broadcast, raised his phone slightly, and said, "That was a hell of a quote." I smiled politely and kept walking. I thought about how many years I had spent trying to earn approval that was never mine to earn, how validation had once felt like oxygen, how silence had once felt like exile. Now it was power. Across the city, the country club had gone quiet. The staff cleared tables, collecting half-finished drinks and discarded napkins. The television near the bar still glowed faintly. My mother sat alone at a table near the window, the white orchids in front of her drooping slightly. On the screen, the final moments of the interview replayed. Lydia said, "You've changed how people see quiet success. What comes next?" I had answered simply, "The work continues." No one clapped, but online the world was already applauding. Vindication had become visible. By midnight, the clip had been reposted by business networks, women's leadership forums, and tech groups. Hashtags formed around my name around the phrase, "Build something that makes silence awkward." Strangers debated whether it was humility or revenge inspiration or irony. I didn't read most of them. I sat on my balcony with a glass of water watching the lights blink across the city skyline. Somewhere behind those windows, people were watching my story unfold, unaware of the years that had built each quiet layer. Vindication wasn't loud, it was steady, it was earned. And for the first time, it belonged entirely to me. By Saturday morning, the internet had already turned my family's silence into spectacle. The first clip came from a party guest who had filmed the moment the Channel 7 broadcast interrupted the music. It was shaky, grainy, too long to hold attention under normal circumstances, but the caption carried the punch. Imagine disinviting your own daughter and then seeing her face on national news. Within hours, the video crossed 1 million views. By the second day, it reached 3.4 million. Someone slowed the footage and overlaid my interview audio, my voice steady, saying, "Don't shout for recognition. Build something that makes silence awkward." TikTok's algorithm did the rest. I didn't post revenge. The world did it for me. Comment sections filled with strangers dissecting the scene like a morality play. On Facebook, a woman from Ohio wrote karma served with champagne. Another added, "That's the coldest redemption I've ever seen." The hashtag spread faster than I could scroll. Disinvitegate trended for 2 full days. People used it for everything from family drama to workplace betrayal, a shorthand for poetic justice. My mother's social media vanished quietly on Sunday afternoon. Her friends had tagged her in too many posts, each one a mirror she couldn't control. The country club issued a statement about respecting privacy after someone uploaded clips of guests whispering while my photo filled the screen. Robert's downfall was quieter, but sharper. A legal blog discovered that the firm he worked for had represented Syntrix. Someone in the comments pointed out the irony attaching screenshots from the press release. By Monday morning, his name had been removed from the client announcement. On LinkedIn, his profile lost the company tag. The platform doesn't show humiliation, only absence, but absence can scream. They wanted optics. They got exposure. I didn't need to speak. The algorithms did that for me. Each network became an echo chamber of poetic symmetry. People wrote essays on family arrogance, women's success, quiet resilience. A podcast host quoted my line from the interview and said, "She turned exclusion into empire. I didn't listen to all of it. Too much noise distorts meaning." On Tuesday evening, I sat by the window scrolling through headlines, not to gloat, but to understand the scale of it. The coverage had shifted from gossip to analysis. Financial outlets praised Syntrix's precision, while lifestyle magazines discussed dignity as the new form of revenge. My inbox overflowed with speaking invitations, panel requests, even a book agent offering representation. I declined them all. Some victories lose their purity when monetized too soon. Instead, I opened my old Twitter account, the one I hadn't touched in years. The profile picture was still my college graduation photo. I typed a single sentence. Some parties celebrate appearances, others build something real. Then I closed the app and went for a walk. By the time I returned, it had 120,000 likes and thousands of retweets. I read a few of the replies, people telling their own stories of exclusion, of being underestimated, of choosing work over acceptance. It didn't feel like fame. It felt like resonance. Across the city, my mother avoided calls. Aunt June left me a voicemail saying she was worried about Carol. She said the stress was making her ill, that the gossip had turned cruel. I listened quietly, guilt flickering, somewhere between obligation and exhaustion. It wasn't my story anymore. It belonged to the world, now repurposed into a lesson people needed. My father tried to call next. I let it go to voicemail, too. His message was short. We should talk. Not about money, about family. I saved it without replying. That night, I met Anna for dinner near the waterfront. The restaurant was dim, filled with low chatter and the faint sound of jazz. She raised her glass toward me. "Congratulations on your global debut," she said, half teasing. I laughed softly. "I didn't post anything," I said. She smiled. "That's the best part. You didn't have to. The world loves a story that writes itself." Outside, the city lights shimmered on the water, each reflection slightly distorted, but still beautiful. Success looked different from this distance. Not loud, not performative, just still. I remembered the years of being ignored, of feeling invisible at dinners where my opinions were brushed aside. Now invisibility had become armor. "People mistake silence for surrender," I said. "It's just focus." Anna nodded. "You proved that better than anyone." "I wasn't proving them wrong," I said quietly. "I was proving myself right." After dinner, I walked alone for a while, the cool air wrapping around me. The headlines had started calling it poetic justice, but justice wasn't the goal. It was consequence. By Wednesday morning, the story had peaked. A new controversy replaced it on the trending page, as stories always do. The noise moved on, but the echo remained. My words, my face, my silence, all archived online like a digital artifact of restraint. Robert stopped posting. My mother stayed offline. My father's email arrived a week later, short and formal. "I'm proud of what you built." The line was both apology and distance. I didn't answer right away. Some things didn't need closing. They needed quiet endurance. On the 13th day, I returned to the office. Syntrix signs had already been replaced with tech venture logos. Employees greeted me with warmth and pride. None of them mentioned the viral storm. They just said thank you. In their eyes, I saw what legacy was supposed to look like. Real, grounded quiet. The world had finished its spectacle. Now the work could begin again. 2 weeks passed before my father called. The tone of his voice on the voicemail was almost gentle, the kind of careful calm people use when they are not sure which version of you will answer. He said he wanted to have lunch to talk for peace. His words deliberate, almost diplomatic. I agreed to meet him the following afternoon at a quiet restaurant near the University District. It was the kind of place with linen napkins and soft jazz chosen by people who mistake civility for reconciliation. He was already there when I arrived, seated at a corner table with his usual composure. He looked smaller somehow, the confidence in his posture tempered by something close to unease. "Meredith," he said, standing to pull out my chair, his smile strained but practiced. "Thank you for coming." I sat down, ordered tea, and waited. For a moment neither of us spoke. The silence filled the space between us like fog. He cleared his throat. "It has been quite a few weeks, hasn't it?" I nodded. "News travels faster than apologies," I said softly. He smiled faintly, unsure if it was safe to laugh. "I wanted to tell you that your mother and I have been talking. We think it's time to move forward to heal. Robert mentioned he could introduce you to some investors for your next project." I looked up slowly, the tea warm between my hands. "Investors," I repeated. He nodded enthusiastically. "Yes," he said, "Robert has valuable connections. His firm works with major venture groups now. He could help you scale whatever you plan next." I studied his face for a moment, the confidence returning as he spoke about my brother's influence, the hierarchy reassembling itself in his mind. Then I said, "He already has, through Syntrix Legal." The sentence landed quietly, almost tenderly, but I saw it register like a blow. My father blinked, confused. I continued. "Robert's firm handled our compliance filings. I invested anonymously through one of their subsidiary funds 2 years ago. The fund he managed personally. He's been earning returns from my capital since then." My father froze, his jaw tightening as the math arranged itself in his head. I could see the exact moment pride turned to comprehension. "You mean to tell me he began that Robert?" I finished for him that Robert has already been introducing me to investors. He just didn't know it. I smiled, not cruelly, but with the calm that comes when truth finally folds back on itself. They called me unfit. I became their silent shareholder. My father exhaled slowly, the sound of defeat masked as disbelief. "I never knew," he said. "You never asked," I replied. The waiter arrived, with our food breaking the silence with the clink of silverware. My father picked at his meal without appetite. After a while, he said, "You know your mother is still hurt. People said cruel things. She didn't mean to exclude you." I stirred my tea gently. "Love isn't leverage," I said. His fork stopped midway. "What does that mean?" "It means forgiveness isn't a currency to be traded when convenience returns. It has to exist on its own or it isn't real." He looked down, then back up at me, his eyes tired. "You've become very sure of yourself." "No," I said, "I've just stopped asking for permission to exist." The silence that followed was heavy, but not hostile. It was the kind of silence that sits at the edge of acceptance. After a few minutes, he reached for his wallet, but I stopped him. "Lunch is paid," I said. Conversation closed. I placed my card on the table and stood. He didn't move, just watched me gather my coat. "You really are your mother's daughter," he said quietly. "No," I answered. I learned from her what not to become. As I walked out into the pale afternoon light, I felt no triumph, no vengeance, just clarity. Forgiveness, I realized, wasn't about letting them back in. It was about walking away without taking their weight with me. Outside, the city moved as if nothing extraordinary had happened. People carried coffees, traffic lights changed, lives continued. My phone buzzed once, a message from Anna that read, "Meeting with Margaret next week confirmed. Ready for the next phase?" I replied, "Always." I glanced at my reflection in a shop window, the same calm face that once looked uncertain in the glow of family dinners. The difference now was the quiet behind my eyes. I no longer needed anyone to see me to believe I existed. As I crossed the street, I thought about my father sitting alone at the table, rehearsing explanations that would never fit the truth. Would I forgive or let them live with what they built? The question lingered, gentle but unyielding. I chose silence again. Some lessons sound louder when left unsaid. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, tucked inside a cream envelope with handwriting I recognized instantly. Aunt June's name was in the corner, but I knew the real author before I opened it. My mother had never written me a letter before. She preferred phone calls short and efficient, filled with practical questions about weather and work. But this paper felt different. The edges slightly wrinkled, as if someone had held it too long before letting it go. I sat by the kitchen window, light falling across the counter, and read the first line aloud. Meredith. I cared so much about what people thought, I stopped seeing who you were. I stopped reading for a moment. The ink was smudged near the bottom, maybe from a tear, maybe from hesitation. She wrote about pride, about fear, about how appearances had become her language because she never learned another way to feel safe. She said she had watched the interviews and the news not out of envy, but shame. She said, "You did what I never could. You stood still while others tried to define you. You built something real." There was no flattery in her tone, no attempt to rewrite history. It was an unadorned confession. I read the letter 3 times and didn't cry. The words didn't demand tears. They asked for stillness. For once, she wasn't performing. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She earned it by telling the truth. I folded the letter carefully, slid it back into the envelope, and placed it beside my mug. The air in the apartment felt different, lighter but uncertain. I texted Aunt June. "Tell her I'll meet for coffee tomorrow." The next day, we met at a small cafe near Green Lake, the kind of place that smelled like warmth and nostalgia. My mother was already there, sitting by the window, her hands wrapped around a cup she hadn't touched. When she saw me, she stood quickly, then paused, unsure if a hug was allowed. I gave a small nod, and she sat back down. For a long time, we just looked at each other. Time had softened her, but not erased the careful way she held herself, as if every movement needed approval. She said, "I wasn't sure you'd come." I replied, "Neither was I." She smiled faintly, eyes glistening but steady. "The letter," I said. "It was honest." She nodded. I wanted to say it for years, but didn't know how. I thought success made things easier to explain, but it only made silence heavier. She sipped her coffee, hands trembling slightly. "Robert was always jealous of your calm," she said quietly. "He could never stand how unbothered you seemed. Your silence made him feel small." I didn't respond right away. I had known it in pieces, but hearing her say it filled in the last missing shape of the puzzle. She continued, "I told myself I was protecting the family, but what I was really protecting was my own image. I hurt you for it, and I'm sorry." I looked out the window. The lake shimmered in the distance, ducks moving slowly across the surface. I thought about how many years I had waited for this kind of truth, how many times I had imagined it would feel like victory. It didn't. It felt like balance. Sometimes apologies whisper louder than praise. I reached across the table, touched her hand lightly, not forgiveness yet, but something close. She smiled, tears slipping silently down her face. "You don't have to forgive me today," she said. "I don't need that anymore. I just needed you to know I finally see you." "That's enough." I nodded. We sat in silence, listening to the hum of the cafe, the clinking of cups, the murmur of conversations that belonged to other people. It wasn't reconciliation like in movies. There was no dramatic embrace, no perfect closure, just 2 women sharing the same quiet for the first time without pretending it meant nothing. When the coffee cooled, she stood. "May I hug you?" she asked softly. I hesitated, then said yes. The embrace was awkward but real, like something being rebuilt with old materials. When she left, I stayed behind for a while, rereading her letter under the table. The words looked smaller now, but their weight remained. As I walked home, I realized the distance between us wasn't gone, but it had stopped growing. Healing didn't mean forgetting. It meant finally standing still. 6 months later, the air in Seattle carried that cool clarity that comes only at the start of autumn, when the city feels both alive and reflective. The Museum of Flight glimmered under soft evening light, its glass wings filled with the sound of conversation and quiet applause. The event was called Women Building Futures, a celebration of innovation and resilience. I stood backstage, microphone clipped to my collar, hands steady. Rows of chairs stretched across the hangar, polished and aligned beneath a suspended aircraft. Among them sat founders, engineers, artists, and students, all waiting for stories of creation born from doubt. It was strange being invited to speak about success when success had begun with exclusion. Anna stood beside me, adjusting my mic. "Ready?" she asked. "As I'll ever be," I replied. The host introduced me with words I barely heard, something about legacy, leadership, and vision. I walked to the stage. The sound of applause felt distant, like rain on glass. A spotlight followed me as I approached the podium. To my left, a single empty chair stood beside the stage, lit from above. I had asked for it to be there. The same design as the ones from the dinner that night years ago, when I had sat small at the edge of the table, unseen. The chair glowed quietly, a reminder, not a wound. I began slowly. 6 years ago, I built a company in a one-bedroom apartment with no funding, no roadmap, and no guarantee that anyone would take me seriously. People called it reckless. Some called it naive. My family called it temporary. The audience listened, still and intent. I continued. What they didn't realize was that doubt can be a powerful kind of fuel. Every dismissal became an ingredient in the structure I built. I paused, glancing at the empty chair. Some of us spend our lives waiting for a seat at someone else's table. I smiled softly. I stopped waiting. The audience murmured, sensing the line they had come for. Respect isn't inherited. It's built line by line. The applause rose gently, then quieted. I told them about the journey not as triumph, but as process, about the nights of uncertainty, the mornings of persistence, the quiet between victories. I spoke about silence as a tool, about patience as an act of rebellion. And when I said the world doesn't always invite you, sometimes you have to build your own door. The room nodded with that collective understanding only women share. Toward the end, I looked again at the chair. They wouldn't give me a seat at their table, I said, so I built my own. The audience stood, applause echoing through the steel and glass, soft but unending. The lights reflected off the aircraft wings above, scattering patterns of light across the room. For a moment, I felt the same calm I had felt the day the deal closed, but warmer, human. This was not vindication anymore. It was continuation. I stepped off stage as the host thanked me. Backstage, Anna hugged me briefly. "You finally said it," she whispered. I nodded. "It wasn't revenge anymore," I said. "It was architecture." Later that night, I returned home, the city glittering below the hill. My apartment felt both familiar and new, like a space that had finally exhaled. I poured a glass of water and turned on the television. Channel 7 was airing a recap of the event. My speech played again, my image beneath the caption, "Women Building Futures." The camera lingered on the empty chair beside the podium, the light around it glowing like memory. Somewhere across town in her living room, my mother watched the same broadcast. Aunt June later told me she sat very still, no tears, no apology, just quiet pride. When the speech ended, she whispered, "She did it." Then she smiled, the small kind that doesn't need witnesses. I turned off the television, stood by the window, and looked out at the city I had built a life within. The skyline shimmered with reflections of 1,000 unseen stories, each one a spark of defiance. I didn't need their table. I became the table. The words stayed in my mind not as a slogan, but as truth. The empty chair from the event now rested in my office, a simple wooden seat with a small brass plate engraved with a single word, enough. When I passed it each morning, I touched the backrest, lightly, a reminder that worth isn't something given, it's something constructed through presence, through work, through staying. Outside, the planes at the museum glowed faintly against the dark sky, symbols of flight, built from persistence and design. I thought of the generations to come, the women who would stand on new stages and tell stories of their own. If you were erased once, what would you build to make the world remember? The question lingered quietly in the night air. I didn't answer it. I was already living it.